It's been on the back burner for, over a year now, but we're very excited to have it out in the world, and we're very proud of it. And arrangements of Rite of Spring and Petrushka. The idea being to take the essence of the orchestral piece, not try to replicate it.
It was great to connect again with today's guest. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we're sitting down to talk to Ben Hanlon, the awesome bassist living in Melbourne, Australia, playing in the Melbourne Symphony and doing so many other projects, which we talk about today. The last time we had him on the podcast, we were talking in person at a cafe in this cool hipster area of Melbourne. We did it over Zoom this time, just like everything, but I can't wait to see Ben again in person. Ben has been busy during the pandemic. He just released a duo album titled Stravinsky with James Sherlock. I heard that duo live in 2019 at Rob Nairn's Melbourne Bass Day. That was awesome. His trio Ball Hanlon Schulz, which we talk about in here, also just released a new album called Land of If, and he's done like 10 other projects. I've got them all linked up in the show notes. You got to check it out. Quick shout out to our sponsors, Upton Bass, Dorico, and Ear Trumpet Labs. More on them later, but let's dig into this conversation with the great and powerful Ben Hanlon. Hey, what's up, man? How are you doing?
Hey, man, how you doing?
I'm good. How's life for you? In lockdown again, it sounds like. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. It's disappointing, but it's all right.
I've been following along. You know, Leonardo Puglisi, Ben Puglisi's son, he's got this YouTube 6 News Australia, and ever since I visited Australia, I've watched just about every single one of those, and so I followed along with. It's like it's been a rough year and a half. The bushfires were like just ramping up when I left in November 2019, and then this lockdown, and then it looks like you all, you've had these moments where it looks like it's gotten a lot better, and then these just crazy lockdowns keep on happening, it seems.
Oh, yeah. Look, the lockdowns are frustrating, but at the same time, we just had, I think, 89 days of zero COVID. We got to the point where we had zero restrictions, zero masks. We had, full crowds at gigs and 100% capacity for the orchestra and, things that aren't possible anywhere else in the world just yet. So we have to sort of take it with a grain of salt, but the downside of having eliminated the virus pretty early and having zero for so long is that if you get even one case, it's a huge deal, and that's what's happened this time. And so, look, we'll drive it down to zero again. I think they're hopeful that we'll get it done in 2 weeks, and then there'll be some restrictions on for probably about a month, and then we'll be back to normal life. And the obvious upside of that is that we've been very lucky, very few deaths from COVID over here, and it's far less scary than a lot of other places. But at the same time, for musicians and creatives, obviously we lose a lot of gigs. So I saw you spoke to Erica a couple of weeks ago about her launch. Unfortunately, like my launch, her launch had to be postponed, and there's quite a few musicians in that boat because the lockdown came in 2 weeks ago or a week ago, and while we're in lockdown, there's only 5 reasons to leave your house, and you don't get a crowd for anything, even if you could put something on, which you can't. So
yeah, man, it's great. It's been interesting following along with Australia over here this past year plus, because you knocked out of the park in terms of eliminating the virus so much earlier, and so when we're sitting here, there's now finally the vaccination rate has gotten so high here in the States that finally things. I mean, it's like all of a sudden after just this endless slog, things are feeling back to normal, and mask restrictions are not completely gone, but almost gone. They are completely gone in some parts of the U.S., but even here in California, June 15th, things are supposed to be pretty much back to normal, and it's been interesting. Yeah. It's like everybody crawling out from out of their bomb shelter and getting back. But it's funny. It's like on the streets of San Francisco, it's looking pretty much like it did in late 2019. So, but it's been in the dark hours here. It's been great following along, like watching concerts. Like seeing concerts is like wow, concerts. concerts in Australia. Watching Phoebe's concerts in Queensland or watching what you all have been up to. So I know it's a bummer to have the lockdown back, but it's got to be not, talking to some folks over here, like especially people in the opera orchestras, like the Met, there's just no sign of when that's coming back. And so it's great that you've had at least been able, even though you're in this lockdown again, it's great that you've been able to kind of keep it rolling.
Yeah, and I mean, part of the reason for this lockdown again is that we're the only state that has cases at the moment. So, Phoebe up in Queensland and Alex and Case and the section up in Sydney and all the people in Adelaide and Perth and the whole rest of the country has 0 cases. So they're basically normal. Unlike you guys, which is one thing our federal government stuffed up the vaccine rollout a little bit. We've only vaccinated 2% of the entire population. So we've got a long way to go on that front. And in a way, this has maybe been a blessing in disguise in that it's fired people up to get vaccinated. I think people were taking their time just because things are so normal. Mm-hmm. People haven't felt the need to get vaccinated, and now everyone's rushing out and doing it, of course. So hopefully we can get to where you guys are in terms of vaccines, and that'd obviously offer us a level of protection so we wouldn't have to do lockdowns. But in the meantime, we're just counting our blessings that, for most of the last year and a half, Melbourne's been a bit unlucky, but the rest of Australia has been basically normal. So it's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I squeezed in that trip when I did, I'm glad.
You nailed it. Nailed the timing.
Who knows when the next time, I got invited to go to Germany in May, and I was thinking, I'm not sure if I'm ready to just do an international flight yet. And then I think I'm glad I did, because I think that Europe got a third or fourth or whatever wave. So, but I finally left the city of San Francisco for the first time 2 weeks ago. I haven't even left the city. Haven't even crossed a bridge, and then I went, which is bonkers, but I went up to Seattle, and now things are actually on the calendar. I'm going to Los Angeles. I'm going to this Wabass Institute in later this month, I guess. So yeah. So finally things are, and I'm looking at some bands here and groups that there are actually dates on the calendar for folks. So that's good.
Well, yeah, we've got this unique situation here. So we're mainly doing local artists here because we've got this thing called hotel quarantine, because all our borders are shut. Mm-hmm. If you come to Australia, you have to spend 2 weeks on your own in a room until that they can confirm that you don't have it and that you're not going to spread it. And so, yeah, the artists that have come out to sort of conduct the orchestra, and they've had to learn a lot about themselves by sitting in a room for 2 weeks. We've had some conductors who were obviously very keen and came out and conducted the orchestra, but they had to watch a lot of Netflix and try and work out in a small hotel room for 2 weeks, and all the tennis players did that for the Open too. So yeah, if you do want to come back anytime soon, you'd have to be pretty keen on binge watching something, I think.
Yeah. So we'll see. I'll keep an eye on that situation, but.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think anyone wants to do that. Yeah.
Well, but it's been you passed along a link of you all playing some Beethoven. It was like a pandemic. Is that a recent concert that you passed along? Do you know the link I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. So that was one of our first concerts back in Hamer Hall at the start of the year. So essentially, while the rest of Australia has been open for most of last year, from about June, Melbourne unfortunately had a second wave caused by this hotel quarantine thing that we talked about. Unfortunately, hotel rooms aren't ideal for these aerosol transmissions that we're all learning about. So we had a case get into the community and it took off, and that was the worst Australia experienced of the virus, unfortunately. Quite a number of people died, and we ended up in lockdown for an extra 3 months to everyone else. So we were a bit slower coming back to concert halls and things. So when the orchestra did come back in November, all of our concerts, because that's our summer, we were able to do in an outdoor venue called the Maya Music Bowl, which was great because actually you could have more people in there. They're spaced out, it's outdoors. Festival vibe, which is really, really fun. But obviously, as an orchestra, we were really, really looking forward to getting ourselves back into the concert hall. And that was Jaime Martin, who's a wonderful Spanish conductor who we love a lot, conducting our very first concert back in Hamer Hall, where we've actually been doing a bit of a unique setup for our concerts this year. In order to get the maximum number of people through, at that time we could only do 50% of a hall. We would do 2 different programs a night. So that was our first program where we had a modern Australian work and eroica, and then we waited an hour and we do another program which is a different work and Brahms' Second Symphony, both with the same conductor, which was fun but intense. And yeah, so that's from that, and that's been really enjoyable just to be playing lots of music, and sort of felt like flicking a switch, going from lockdown and self-practice to big programs and double programs every week for a while there, which was full on.
This episode is brought to you by Ear Trumpet Labs. These are hand-built microphones out of Portland, Oregon, and they make an excellent mic for upright bass called Nadine. Barry Green got to try out this mic at our 2020 online bass summit where Ear Trumpet Labs was a sponsor, and he was singing its praises all weekend long. It's an instrument-mounted condenser mic with an incredibly clear, natural sound and great feedback rejection. It's durable and works with in-ears, monitors, you name it. Not to mention, Christian McBride, Barry Bales, and Missy Raines are all Nadine users. Whether it's classical, jazz, Americana, or bluegrass, this mic seriously delivers, and they're offering a free t-shirt, especially to Contrabass Conversations listeners with a purchase of a mic. Just visit www.eartrumpetlabs.com/contrabass to claim yours and check out Nadine. People have been saying such great things about my course with Discover Double Bass Beginners Classical Bass. Here is Nicholas Walker, professor of double bass at Ithaca College and past president of the International Society of Bassists. Nicholas writes, Jason draws from this vast network with his contagious enthusiasm and love of learning. Presented through the beautifully organized and easily accessible framework of Discover Double Bass, this is a terrific learning experience for any beginner, as well as a great model for any new teacher. I am blushing, Nicholas. Thank you so much. I'm just so thrilled with how this course came out. Jeff Chalmers and the whole team at Discover Double Bass are so professional. It was such a great experience, and it was the best representation of what I would love to take every single beginner through in terms of format and presentation, and I'm just so happy that it's out there. You can learn more. We've got a link in the show notes, or you can just visit discoverdouble.com/Jason Heath. Well, how about, I mean, you've got like this double life in a really cool way. At least I remember talking to you, and we were hanging out, let me see if I get it right, on Fitzroy on Gertrude Street in this like hipster coffee shop.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome sandwiches, I remember. And I remember you just describing the quantity of like the clubs and just the thriving jazz scene of Melbourne. I mean, I've actually quoted you or paraphrased you a bunch of times since we talked about that, because I was just thinking like, dang, Melbourne's got a scene. Like you know, we've got a few clubs here in the Bay Area, but it's nothing like that. How is stuff been like in that arena? Have things been able to be open, or have things shut down or gone out of business? I mean, it can be rough for the indie venues, I imagine.
It was very rough for the indie venues and for the indie artists. There were some problems. We had some great government support here in terms of financial support offered to people while we were in lockdown, but a lot of the sort of casual artists that weren't linked to a contract or a job fell through the cracks of that. So it was really tough for a lot of jazz musicians here. It was also tough for the smaller venues just because, you know, you never know when things were going to open again. But the one positive was that because the numbers are so low in those venues and it's much easier to contact trace who had been there, they were actually the first ones to open. So whereas the orchestra's really only been going in earnest since January, and we did a lot of studio recordings last year and some outdoor gigs, the jazz clubs all opened back up sort of October, November, first with masks and first with various outdoor settings and then indoor settings. But it was really nice. And for me, that sort of went back to normal relatively quickly. By summer, gigs were sort of back to normal. There was a lot of jazz happening, and having that double life meant that I was enjoying playing a lot more music than I would have been if I was waiting for the orchestra. So that was really fun. And it's all bounced back. This latest lockdown will really hurt it again. Obviously, some of those venues are week to week. I don't think we've lost any of the venues I told you about last time, but it'd probably be a line ball like most businesses around the world. But they're all still there and they're all still kicking. And yeah, we're still doing our I think it's 10 years now, our residency of this bebop band in Fitzroy, and we were able to get back to that November last year, which was really special, and we've been doing it ever since. And no, the scene's coming back. It's been a tough time, but it's coming back. And for me, it was really great because I would have been waiting a little while longer to play for people in the classical arena, but the jazz venues were open a bit earlier, and that was fun.
Well, I'm living vicariously through you, Ben. That's great. That my bass in the corner over there that has not left the front door since March 2020. And it's funny. I know it's depressing. I actually did a video review of some bass cases, and I put my case on my bass, and I realized I have not put my case on my bass in 15 months or 14 months or whatever it's been. So it's like kind of a weird. But again, like I said, I got stuff on the calendar, so the bass will leave the house again.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I know. And more has survived, at least here in San Francisco, than I expected. I was, about this time last year, I was pretty pessimistic as I saw, it looked like a disaster movie for sure here. But more has survived than I thought. And, the larger institutions like the Symphony, certainly the Symphony, and I don't know what the opera's plan is. It might not be until 2022, but things are coming back. So it's good.
That's great. That's awesome. So it should. It's such a great city. And yeah, it's so nice to watch that sort of rejuvenation happen from over here too, because as I said, we need to get onto the vaccines, and seeing what it's doing for America and you guys after everything you've been through is just so exciting and wonderful. I've been watching the Colbert Show every night, and just watching the excitement as things start to come back to normal. It's fantastic.
Oh, people are pumped. It is a party. People are ready to get some action. It's been interesting seeing just how happy people are. And we had in our summer, we had things loosen up and some outdoor concerts were happening. And so I remember the first music I saw since the pandemic started. I think it was maybe July last year. It was this funk band on the waterfront, and I was just like, music! It was such and everybody was just so happy. And then we had another, everything shut down for months, and that was even more depressing in a way, because you sort of saw this little glimmer of this reduced lifestyle, but at least the cup, and then they shut down outdoor dining and everything for a long hard couple of months. And so fingers crossed, things are looking pretty optimistic here. So
I think if there has been an upside to all of this from the music industry point of view, one of the most amazing things for us was when things started opening up. Obviously, we were all worried that there might be some trepidation in audiences coming back, and people were just so desperately keen to see music performed that we got... Every gig was selling out. Obviously, reduced capacities helped, but there was just such a groundswell of support for everything, from the symphony to the jazz gigs to just everything. And while as things went back to normal for longer, that dissipated somewhat and went back to somewhat normal, it's still been that you will get a lot more people for gigs than you ever have before. And that's been a really edifying and exciting thing, because obviously it's not just exciting to be back there playing music, but it's exciting to play music for people that are really excited, and there's a lot of them. Took some getting used to, because we're all a little bit skittish around crowds after all that time on our own, but that was one of the really nice things, and one of the things we're still enjoying. And I actually think that people had sort of lost that appreciation for how lucky we were to be doing it, and maybe this current lockdown might mean that the events after it fill up again, because it's a horrible reminder of how boring it is to be stuck inside.
I have had my fill of Netflix. I've had my fill of my own cooking, and it's I'm sure most people think this, but I can't imagine myself taking anything for granted ever again. Not that I think I really took a lot for granted, but I was thinking the last time I subbed with the San Francisco Symphony, I always appreciate doing that, but it was another week, I get back, and concerts that I would go to, and so it'll be I certainly am going to. I have been a frequent concert attender, such as I can, since we've been getting out of things here, and I think that's going to continue for quite some time.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's just really nice to be able to go and see things, hear things, and play things. We are very blessed to do what we do.
How much travel did the Melbourne Symphony in a typical year do much travel, like pre-pandemic?
Yeah. So we do 3 regional tours every year. Mm-hmm. So Victoria's one of the smallest states of Australia, which is still massive relative to other places, except the States, obviously. Mm-hmm. But so we go to all the regional centres over 3 different tours, and we'll be away for a week at a time to do that. And we had a tour to Europe planned for 2020, which we lost, and we had another tour to Asia planned for 2021 that obviously we lost pretty early on. So we're back doing our regional tours, which we really love because you sort of just jump on a bus and all hang out together and go to some really lovely places and do some fun things like see what the best pie is over that area of regional Victoria and, check out the pubs after the concerts. And it's a very receptive audience. So we've been back doing that, and we did our first week of that a month ago, playing Prokofiev's Classical Symphony in the Four Seasons and some modern Australian pieces, and that was fantastic. We had soloists from within the orchestra because obviously with international travel limited, the positive thing is we've been able to shine a spotlight on all of our locals, and I think a lot of people have really enjoyed that. So yeah, we normally would do an enormous amount of touring, not as much as some of the big American or European orchestras, but as much as an Australian orchestra does. Obviously, it's more difficult for us. It's a long way to go to anywhere. But all the international has gone, but we're still able to do our regional, which is really nice.
That's cool that you've been able to get out locally, regionally, and do some. That's one of those things that struck me, that just the distance from Australia to certainly Western Europe or the United States. Like, my goodness, that flight from San Francisco to Sydney, which, I mean, that is about as direct as you're going to get from the United States to, maybe LA is a couple hours closer. But my wife, when I came back from Australia, first of all, she was a little annoyed that I didn't take her to Australia, but it just didn't work schedule-wise. But she definitely started to become highly interested in Australia and realized, moving from America to Australia and being a doctor, that's like not a hard move. And so she's like, should we think about moving to Australia? And it's like, it's an incredible country. If you like California, this is my generalization. It's like, take what you like about California, but make it nicer, make it feel a little more almost futuristic and certainly cleaner. But then I said to her, it's like, but do you like long flights, honey? And she said, I don't know, what's a long flight? It's like 18 hours. And that's just that's the one thing that, although, Rob Nair, and he was talking to me about that. And he said, you just got to think of it in terms of movies. It's like 4 movies or 5 movies or something like that. And if you look at it that way, it's not so extreme.
When we did our last American tour, because our orchestra is sponsored by Emirates Airways, so sort of Abu Dhabi, we flew to Chicago via Abu Dhabi. So we flew for 40 hours to get to Chicago and then play it, in the hall there. And that was the most brutal start to a tour. I think we had one day off before we then went and did the concert, and I remember just sort of getting out of bed and not really knowing where I was, what was going on. That was a lot of movies. I think I ran out of movies. You're in trouble when you're on the airplane and you're sort of getting through your 6th or 7th complete CD compilation or something, and you're thinking, oh man, this has to end.
With Upton Bass, there is a lot of dialogue back and forth between Upton and the person they're designing the bass for. Here's Gary and Eric on that topic.
By the time I'm taking an order, we may have a dozen emails. We got a couple phone calls back and forth. I mean, it is extremely rare that the phone rings, hey, first-time caller, here's my credit card.
Yeah.
We've got a relationship.
Hours and hours and hours.
Right. So Gary and I have, we've listened to you enough that within your budget, we've gotten you into the right bass the first time.
Listening is what it's all about, and that's what Gary and Eric and everybody at Upton excel in so spectacularly. Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thanks so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the advanced music notation software from Steinberg. And one of the coolest things about this piece of software, there's so many things, but one of them is their popover option, and it has sped up things so much for me when I'm working in scores. Here's Senior Product Manager Daniel Spreadbury on how popover mode works.
There's like hundreds of notations that you might want to create, and trying to remember what to type, is it Command Shift Alt, Vulcan Death Grip 7 for this particular notation. But the nice thing about a popover is all you have to remember is the letter of the thing you want to create. So D for dynamics, T for tempo, M for meter, K for key signature.
It might seem like a simple thing, but you would not believe how much that has sped up my workflow. And I'm not even really a composer. I do a lot of arrangements, I do a lot of exercises, but it has taken my workflow probably at least up to 5 times faster. Just that one mode. I can't say enough good things about Dorico. I love it. I use it every single day. There's a free version, Dorico SC, that you can download that lets you do practically everything for up to 2 stabs. So check it out. Dorico.com will take you to their page on Steinberg's website. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. I can't even imagine the jet lag on a 40-hour that is brutal.
I think the good thing is you're so confused, you're so far gone that you're sort of going to get used to whatever time, but because you're just going to sleep as soon as you get there. But yeah, I remember waking up and we were all going to see Lyric Opera in Chicago on our day off, and because Sir Andrew Davis, who was our chief at the time, was also their chief, and I just remember sitting in that theatre, and beautiful theatre, and the walls were spinning, and I just felt like I didn't know what planet I was on. So yeah, 40 hours is too much. You can usually get somewhere in 23 hours, but it's a long time. It's certainly a long time when you're used to shorter flights. It's why Australians love going to New Zealand, because it's only 4 hours, and that's quite a novelty for us. Going anywhere internationally in less than, even Asia is 7-8 hours. So yeah, that's why we love going to New Zealand, because it feels like a normal length flight.
Isn't it kind of? Maybe you were telling me this story. I don't remember back when I was in Australia. But isn't New Zealand? Don't they have like bizarrely rough flights, like the air currents getting into New Zealand or something? Am I remembering that right?
That's right. It's more the way Wellington in particular apparently has one of the most difficult landing strips in the world, because not only is it's infamous for being windy Wellington, it's a really windy city, but the end of the runway is just water. It's just the bay. And so they have to line it up perfectly. And the other end of the runway is the city. So they have to line it up perfectly. And you have quite a few flights where they've done everything right, but they get blown off right at the last minute. And so they'll go back up. And so you just have a level of turbulence that I had never experienced anywhere else. And I was there to play with NZSO, the New Zealand Symphony, brilliant orchestra, and they travel a lot. So they're the national orchestra, so they fly to every other city in New Zealand for every concert, almost. And so we did a lot of flights, and it was the one time where I sort of thought, no, I can't get on any more planes. We had one particularly turbulent flight on the way back into Wellington where I was just like, I do want to go home, but at the same time, I can't do that anymore. I'm just going to stay on the ground for at least a week, because it was crazy. The plane was doing things I didn't know they were able to do. So yeah, be ready. If you're going to land in Wellington, you're probably going to move around a lot.
Okay, yeah. I think I remember you telling. I have some hazy memory of one of my last nights in Melbourne with, I think, you and Sue Wolf and Stewie, Stevie, and okay, I am remembering that right. Okay,
yeah, that was fun. But yeah, I had just done that for the first time. I've been to Wellington a little more since, but yeah, it was full on. Yeah, particularly because we don't get that much turbulence in Australia. It's pretty flat and there's not a lot of mountains for things to come off. And so, yeah, it's that was vivid. I remember that vividly.
When did you move back? Remind me the timeline. I know we talked about this before, but like, when did you come back to Australia?
In 2011. So okay. I had just graduated from Colburn. I was sort of looking into some other options. I loved studying with David, so I was looking at USC and looking at New World, where I'd done a bit of subbing. And Then a job came up in Melbourne Symphony, and I love my home. I'd always wanted to come home, and I was lucky enough to get it. And so it was one of those lucky timings where the job started, I think, 2 months after the end of my degree, and so I sort of just flew back and for good. So 2011.
Okay, wow, that's a chunk of time. You've been back a decade. Wow.
I know, it's flown. Certainly flown. Yeah, a decade, a little over a decade this year. So yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and it just seems like you have such a rich musical life there. I mean, it's just really interesting. Like I think the orchestra sounds awesome. I think it looks like just that whole city center Melbourne remember the name of the hall? It starts with an H, but the
Hamer Hall.
And then the opera company is at the neck. It's like the building over, a couple of buildings over, if I'm remembering right.
The State Theatre, which has a big spire on it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, what a cool town. What a great. What did you think you were going to be doing? If you go back to like when you were in high school, was music it for you, or did you think you were going to play in a symphony orchestra, or did you have an idea in mind? Like what did you envision for yourself?
In the early parts of high school, I was pretty keen on getting into some sort of academic field or medicine. I really enjoyed playing the bass, and it was a lot of fun, and I was playing in rock bands and playing jazz and playing in... The school didn't have an orchestra. The school had a concert band, which, like, I loved it, but playing in a concert band as a double bass player when there's 4 tubas is like a fate worse than death. And so, yeah, I was really enjoying it, and I was practicing a lot, and I had a great teacher, but I didn't really think I was going to do it. And then gradually, without me even really noticing, it became something that I couldn't live without. And I got lucky in terms of having great teachers and having great youth orchestras. And I got to play in a symphony orchestra. First thing I ever did was Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony. And also the soloist was David Helfgott from the movie Shine, playing Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto. So that was a very inspiring concert. And and then by the time I was 16, I couldn't think of doing anything else. And it never occurred to me, actually, that you were supposed to go into one stream or the other, because at my school there'd always been so much music, and I was so lucky, and the program was so strong in every area that I wasn't really aware that I was going to have to go into either an improvisation stream or a classical stream. And so that only sort of became clearer to me my last couple of years of high school. And I had some advice that, the school that I could go to, the Australian National Academy of Music, which is a brilliant school, designed as a postgrad school actually, but I was using it as a platform to hopefully study overseas. That if I could get in there, that even though they didn't have a jazz program, maybe I could study on the side, and ultimately that's what I did. And it was a similar thing at Colburn. They didn't really have a jazz program, but Rex Serrani had been there the year before me and sort of set up a thing where you could go and audit classes at USC, John Clayton's classes, and he was getting lessons from some of the jazz guys in the youth program that Colburn has, and Charlie Hayden had a series at Cal Arts that you could sort of sneak into. And so because Rex had been doing all of those things, I think Patrick Staples, who's now in Canada, brilliant bass player, sort of said to me, oh no, you can still sort of do a little bit of jazz on the side, here's how you do it. And so I was able to do that as well. So yeah, I didn't ever really pick which way I was going to go, and as a result, the only time I really only focused on one was during that late period of college where I was auditioning for symphonies. And then when I got my job in the MSO, I just didn't do anything except MSO, particularly when I was on trial, but even the first couple of years, just because it's such a shock to the system, learning all that repertoire and feeling like you're on top of it every week, and the standard that your colleagues bring in, and, being able to blend with them, and, just feeling comfortable in that environment. And that was the one time I sort of took a break from anything else just to focus on the symphony. And I'm glad I did, because it sort of felt like I got a level in how I approached that and the way I did my preparation that allowed me to do everything else. But yeah, that's basically the story.
It's funny you mentioned Patrick Staples, right?
He was my roommate.
Oh, get out of here! I just interviewed him for the podcast. Actually, he has started making bows. I don't know if you've checked out of any of his bows, but it sounds like they're great. My former student Ian Hallis, so I believe you two had some overlap.
Yeah,
right?
Again, we were at Colburn at the same time.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's a very small world.
Yeah, well, so Ian texted me and said you should really talk to Patrick for the podcast, and you got to check out these bows. Ian's been playing his bows and has been digging. And if Ian makes a recommendation, I always pounce on it because they're always great recommendations. So it was really cool to catch up with him. Wow, very very small world indeed, Ben.
Oh, Patrick was great. Patrick was great to live with. He had all these guitars and these bass guitars and a brilliant CD collection, and one of these people that was infuriatingly good at everything he did. It was really fun. We had a great time living together, and it was great being in a bass class with him. He's a very inspiring bass player. Same with Ian. They both had so many things that they did so well that I didn't do so well. So I found them really inspiring and learned from them a lot. So, yeah, it's a very small world sometimes, the bass world, considering how far Canada is from Australia and Chicago is from Australia. It's really nice to hear that those guys are doing well. I mean, it was a great class. I mean, Robin Kesselman was there as well, and Jens Tenbrook, and a lot of guys that are doing well in the States and have managed to stay in touch with them. And it's just fantastic to hear anything they put up. And there's just so much great bass playing going on worldwide. So, yeah, very proud to know those guys.
Yeah, no, good folks for sure. And it's great to hear your bass playing. What you've been up to at the duo with James. I was listening to the upcoming album because it's not been released yet, right, Stravinsky? So, and I'm remembering back to the Melbourne Bass Day. Did you guys play some Stravinsky on that? I have some. What did you do? Either Petrushka?
Yes, we did.
Right? Okay, which one did you?
We did our suite from Petrushka.
Okay,
that day.
That's what I thought. I just remember thinking, wow, how interesting is that? That's so you guys sound fantastic on that. Has that been a project over the past year, or have you been chipping away at this album for a while? What's the story?
Actually, right after we met and right after that performance, we recorded it. So we had it all back at the very end of 2019.
Okay.
And it's been a journey to release it because obviously we had an album launch sort of planned in 2020 and that just went away. And we were lucky enough to do a performance online of that on the Melbourne Digital Concert Hall, which was a wonderful thing that was set up to support musicians where you could do a paid performance online. And we were lucky enough to perform it on there with a lot of stuff off our first album and just some tunes we'd been learning. And then sort of we sort of, like a lot of people, just let 2020 disappear. James and I sort of kept ourselves entertained in the second lockdown by doing a weekly tune that we would put online on YouTube just for fun, and mainly on Facebook really, but also on YouTube for fun. And then that kept us entertained, was very different to the Stravinsky album. We were still proud of it and happy with how it went. We didn't really want to go back to it again. So we finally had the launch scheduled for last week, and obviously it got postponed again. We're now going to do it in August for safety's sake, because if we're lucky, we can get this back to zero for a while. So it's been on the back burner for, over a year now, but we're very excited to have it out in the world, and we're very proud of it. And arrangements of Rite of Spring and Petrushka, the idea being to take the essence of the orchestral piece, not try to replicate it, just take the essence of it, show great respect to the source material, but then have an improvised section in each movement and have a freedom with how we approach it. In the same way that jazz musicians were approaching musical theatre in the early part of jazz, you'd take a tune like I Got Rhythm, but you wouldn't take the full arrangement. You just take some of the ideas and the harmony and then build on that. And that's sort of what we tried to do with this album and elements of the first album.
It's great. I mean, you two sound fabulous, and what cool arrangements. And if you think of pieces one might pick to do as a bass and guitar duo, massive orchestrations, like Rite of Spring and Petrushka might not be the first to come to mind, but they work great. And just the colors and timbres of the two of you, it's a really cool concept.
Yeah, it was really fun. I mean, it's one of those things where the first album was just James and I getting to know each other as musicians. We do a lot of things together. We play with singers. We play in this bebop band every Wednesday. We play as a trio with a wonderful drummer called Danny Fisher, where it's more a sort of modern jazz thing. And then the duo was more just James and I liked to get together and have a play. And then the first album came about because we sort of had these 11 or 12 pieces and songs. There were a couple of classical arrangements we'd done, but also a lot of jazz and even a pop song on there. But then over the course of time, it sort of became clear that while the other projects, we would do a lot of the more jazz standards or the modern jazz stuff, this became about arranging classical pieces. And so we were having a lot of fun with that. And it was both finding things that we thought would be really challenging to do and also finding things that are steeped in the jazz tradition. You know, Charlie Parker played for Stravinsky, and Stravinsky really had a deep appreciation for jazz. And there's some wonderful moments like Wynton Marsalis singing the Dance of the Adolescents on the Ken Burns jazz documentary is pretty great. And so we just sort of thought it would be a fantastic piece to do. It's appeared a lot in jazz history with people either quoting the rhythms or the melodies, and it felt like a organic thing to be playing in that style, whereas other composers we couldn't quite get to fit as much. I remember we started with the idea of doing some Shostakovich as well, and we still might, but we struggled to make the pieces that we loved feel the way they should in that duo format, whereas the Stravinsky came a bit more naturally, even though it may seem a bit difficult. And the same with the Debussy. So yeah, it's been a fun little challenge, and I feel like this album has more of a concept than the original album. The original album was just a bunch of stuff we really enjoyed playing together, and we're still very proud of it, but this feels more like a united sit-down, and the whole thing is one thing to be enjoyed together, and yeah, we're really proud of that element of it.
Have you got some projects sort of percolating on the back burner? Something now that you got this sort of thematically unified album. Have you got you don't have to reveal them on the podcast, but but have you got some thoughts for future projects like that, albums and such?
James and Danny and I we've been playing a lot with the trio, and a lot of the tunes we sort of put up online throughout 2020 were more trio tunes and some original trio tunes as well. So we've got a trio album in the works for the second half of the year, and I also have a more ultra-modern sort of album coming out in a month with Eugene Ball and Anthony Schulz, who are a trumpet player and a piano accordionist, and we do some just completely new compositions for that particular trio. And one of the fun things we're doing with that trio is, whereas you might think that with that instrumentation, it's pretty obvious. You have bass cover the bass line, accordion cover the harmony, trumpet cover the melody. We've really tried to break that up and have movements where I'm playing the solo voice and the trumpets accompanying and the accordion's playing the bass line and vice versa. And so that's been a really fun and unique challenge. And Anthony's a really great accordion player in that he can do all the sort of stereotypical accordion things, but also is taking the instrument into really interesting spaces and colours and ways of playing and single line playing and all kinds of different things. And that's been really fun to play around with, both in terms of the compositions and in terms of how we bring things to life. So that's coming out. That'll probably come out before Stravinsky now, in the end of June. So yeah, there's that. And Stevie, who you met, and I have been acting principals in the MSO at the moment because we have a lot of vacancies, and we'll hopefully have some auditions once the world goes back to somewhat normal. So yeah, obviously being a principal is a responsibility, and leading a lot of programs. And MSO's streaming service, MSO.live, has a lot of performances up there. I actually had the great and terrifying experience of, after 10 years playing as a tutti in the orchestra, being the principal and having a solo in this arrangement of pictures at an exhibition by Julian Yu, where he actually gave the full Samuel Goldberg and Schmoel to the double bass pretty much on its own. So that was wonderful and terrifying, and that's up on a streaming service for all eternity now. So yeah, lots of experiences like that. We have a lot of great concerts with MSO coming up in the second half of the year that will be really fun.
It's going to be really interesting stepping up and sharing the principal role after all the years as the tutti section. That's got to be, especially in the band you're used to playing in, right? You know, it's wow.
We've been doing it for 6 months, and I think it's going well so far because the approach we have taken is not that we're the principal, it's that we're a tutti sitting in the principal chair. And one of the advantages of that is that we know all the things that really annoy our tutti colleagues, having been the ones being annoyed over all these years. So we're just trying not to do those things. So that's been really fun. Just get the bowings done early. Don't change them too much. Be consistent with when you lead things in, and hopefully play things well. And so far, so good. Obviously, we look forward to having some auditions and getting some new colleagues because, we're down to sort of 3 out of a section of 8 at the moment. So there was just a number of retirements that happened to be at the same time. And so we're in the position of rebuilding our section, which is very exciting. And, hopefully we can get onto an audition pretty soon.
Well, and what a cool orchestra to play in, and wow, that's a lot of vacancies. How does it work in Melbourne, or how does it work in Australia in terms of? And I'm asking in part for all the non-Australian people gunning for auditions that are listening to this podcast. Like how does it work? Do you have an Australia only audition and then open it up, or do you just kind of let it rip and open it up to everybody right off the bat? How does that work for your orchestra?
Yeah, we're pretty similar to Canada in that way. We have a national round. So the first time any audition goes, it will be Australia and New Zealand permanent residents only, which means if you aren't Australian but you've been living here for a while, then you can still go for it. But it's sort of discounts all the internationals, which I've always personally had mixed feelings about. I think we have a fairly strong scene here, and it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing to open it up because I think you'd still get a decent proportion of Australians and New Zealanders. But that's the system we have at the moment. And in terms of how our system works at the MSO, we're a fully screened audition. The screen never comes down. Usually 3 rounds. We send the repertoire out 2 weeks in advance, usually, sometimes a month in advance, depending on whether it's a tutti or a principal audition. And we usually just have, movement of Bach and a standard concerto or 2 standard concertos and then a bunch of excerpts. And our trials are usually 6 months to a year, although if they go extremely well, they can be significantly shorter. And our panel makeup is the whole bass section, which obviously isn't very big at the moment, plus all the principals from around the orchestra, the concertmasters and the chief conductor. But we don't quite have a chief conductor at the moment, although that might change in the near future. So, yeah.
Okay, wow. So it's quite similar to an audition in the United States. It sounds like, in terms of just the audition setup. I'm always curious because, like lots of European orchestras certainly have a different model, and the Dittersdorf Concerto on big front and center. Yeah. Sounds like you're a lot more like, yeah.
Yeah, it varies from orchestra to orchestra in Australia, it should be said. So whereas our screen doesn't come down, the Sydney Symphony, for example, a wonderful orchestra, their screen comes down in the last round. And there are a number of other orchestras like that in Australia. And there are orchestras that ask for just classical concerto. So it varies from orchestra to orchestra, but MSO's pretty consistently been... Yeah, pretty similar to the States. I think the Met has a very similar system to us. So, yeah.
How on earth does this? I probably asked you this when we were hanging out in Fitzroy in 2019. But the symphony schedule is a full schedule. You have a gig schedule that many people would consider to be like a full-time gig schedule. It sounds like. I know pandemic times are different, but are most of your? I'm just thinking logistically. Are most of your gigs real late at night, or are you playing on days where you just have daytime rehearsals? And I'm thinking about Ted Atkatz, who is principal percussion of the LA Phil, if I'm remembering right, and he was the lead singer in a band, and he would play LA Phil concerts at night and then go rock out till 2 a.m. and it sounds fun, but also Chicago Symphony principal percussion. So anyway, how does that maybe in non-pandemic times, or maybe even now as things are coming back,
even just 2 weeks ago, I mean the week of the launch we were playing we had two different programs that were entirely daytime for the MSO. We had a collaboration with the Singapore Symphony playing the J.C. Bach double orchestra concerto, where they had recorded one half of that and we were recording the other half. And then we had a program of Bach Brandenburg concerto. So that was the program I was on, obviously both reduced programs, basically one bass. And so because I was on our normal rehearsal schedule of sort of 9:30 to 4:30 each day, I then had my gig on a Wednesday night, Bop Stretch, at 8:30. And so I would rehearse with MSO or record with MSO until 4:30, get home, make some dinner, have dinner with my extremely generous and patient wife, and then go straight out and do that gig. And that's usually what happens on a Wednesday, because even if we're in a more heavy 3-performance schedule a week, Wednesday nights are free. So the advantage is my residency is on a Wednesday night, so we do that. I do that pretty much every week. I really don't. There's many excellent Deps, and they have done probably a much better job than me on that gig many times, but I really hate missing that gig because it's such a great band. And then, that particular week I had Joe Kindamo, wonderful piano players trio, on the Saturday night. I had a jazz singer on the Friday night, and I had an afternoon jazz gig on the Sunday before our launch. So it was meant to be a pretty epic week, 6 calls of MSO and then all of that. But obviously we got locked down on the Friday, so it went from 100 to 0 very quickly. And that's usually how I'll manage it. And if there's a big week of MSO or even a big fortnight or something I need to prepare for, I'll just be careful not to take too much on. And at the same time, if there's a really big important jazz gig coming up, if Morrison's in town and I'm doing that gig or one of the bigger ones, then I'll just be really careful to not take on too much on the orchestral side. Usually there's some degree of flexibility with programs. So yeah, that's how I manage it. And then sometimes I just do too much and feel silly. The other challenge is sometimes, like, we came back from regional tour where obviously just everything had been arco, and I went straight into about 3 or 4 big bop gigs in a row and just shredded my fingers on my right hand because I hadn't played anywhere near enough pizzicato for a week. So, there's occupational hazards like that. But in general, it's pretty manageable, and I have to say no to a lot of things that I really want to do, but that's the only downside, really.
Well, I've always that's one of the big challenges for folks that are really proficient in multiple styles on the bass, especially coming back from an arco stint, and then you have some jazz gigs, and you can just like demolish your right hand. I remember talking to Rob Kassinger in the Chicago Symphony about that, and like trying to figure out solutions for taping his fingers, because he was like one of the house bassists for a jazz club in Denver prior to getting to the Chicago Symphony. And do you have any? I mean, sometimes I think things just don't go as planned and you burn out your right hand. Have you figured out any strategies for if like a bunch of pizzicatos coming up? Do you have any sort of like way to prep to not blow out your fingers?
Yeah, I mean, I love Rob. He did that brilliant video with Kurt Elling during the lockdown that was beautiful. Yeah, look, my general strategy is to incorporate as much pits as I can into my warm-up or my scale practice, even if it's a big orchestral week, because usually that's the only way, right? If you're doing a big orchestral week and there's literally no pits in it, like the one I was describing, Classical Symphony and 4 Seasons, there's so little pizzicato in it, and it's also gentle that it's not going to help you too much. So I try to do particularly some of the more intense dexterity exercises or scale practice in the warm-up pizzicato. And then usually when I'm coming back into it, I might just be a little bit careful on the first gig back, just not to. There's a level of playing you can get to and feel quite comfortable, and then if you get a bit overexcited and really start whacking the strings in a way you probably don't need to, but everything's loud and you're a bit overly energetic, that I'd avoid that. But on this particular occasion, I came back, was playing with Carl Mackey, who's a brilliant saxophone player, and Mark Fitzgibbon, who's a brilliant piano player, and Danny, who's a wonderful drummer and one of my closest friends. And we started Yes and No, the Wayne Shorter tune, and I just started absolutely going for it without even thinking about it. And even by the end of that tune, I sort of realized I'd definitely overdone it.
Yeah.
And yeah, by then I just sort of embraced that and hit it as hard as I could for the rest of the gig and regretted it for about a week. But yeah, yeah, definitely incorporating pizzicato into your warm-up as much as possible. I think there's a tendency for most of our exercises, as they should be, to be with the bow because you can hear the intonation so clearly. But if you can just have a couple of warm-up exercises that are pizz, you can save yourself some trouble. Also, Tamara Murphy, who's a wonderful bass player here in Melbourne, had developed a little thing she called the callus saver, which is just a tiny part of a tiny piece of wood with 4 strings on it that you could keep plucking them if you were sitting on the bus or something. So something like that might help. I've never taken that on tour, but I will borrow that from her next time because it was, yeah, the first gig was really fun, and then the second gig was really embarrassing when I was just backing out of everything, just trying to play 2 feels on every tune. It was yeah, whoops.
Yeah, it could be a problem. I had my last experience with that was January 2020 at the NAMM show. I was Bob Mincer is an artist for the company I work for, and they said, we need a bass player. You're a bass player. And I said, I am a bass player. I'm not the bass player you want to accompany Bob Mincer, but apparently that's what I'm doing. And it's like I'm very, these fingers, well, especially during the pandemic, but even normally, yeah, I got a couple pops shows in me, and then I'm starting to be on the verge of blistering up. So I just ruined every playing surface on my right hand for quite some time. And I knew it was happening, and oh well, live and learn, I guess.
It's really easy to do. I think I did a better job of coming back from it this time. I think keeping on playing even when there's some blisters there, but at a really low level, just really easy playing. And then when they start to go, just making sure you put a little bit of methylated spirits in there to dry the underside of the blister, and then keeping that pizz in your warm-up, even if it's a little bit sore, obviously not hurting yourself, but not letting your fingers go completely raw. I think in the old days, I would have gotten to the point where I blistered up and then probably tried to take a couple of days off, and I've discovered that getting the underside of the blister to get hard again, it's better to keep playing only 10 minutes and really don't hurt yourself. But that was my strategy this time, partly because I had gigs, and that worked a lot better. I feel like I got back to normal within 5-6 days, whereas in the past it might have been a 2-week issue. So
besides like blowing out the fingers like that, have you, the quantity of playing that you're doing on some of those heavy weeks, have you ever had any overuse issues? I know that's something that folks struggle with. Or do you have like a routine to keep from that not happening? Because I know that can be an issue, and then you're hauling gear to the gigs, especially if you're talking about the non-classical ones.
Yeah. No, I've been so fortunate. I think on the playing side, I've always had teachers, I think I told you this last time, but I've always had teachers that were really focused on injury prevention and an ergonomic approach to playing. And then on the hauling gear to gigs side, the older I get, the more I get in love with the buggy system and making sure that I'm never actually lifting anything apart from maybe out of the car. Because when I was younger, I used to do all sorts of stupid things and have the bass over the shoulder and the amp on the right arm, and I just will never do that anymore. I'll have 2 buggies or I'll do 2 trips because it would be very, very easy to accidentally twinge something as I hit 35, and it's I think the younger you are too, the more important that gets. I also remember one of the very first lessons I ever had with Paul and David at Colburn. Paul did a long talk to the whole class on how to pick up a bass, and that even if you felt totally fine and there was nothing wrong with your back and you're fit and healthy, to always lift it up properly, to never be twisting, to never be doing that classic Homer Simpson scene where he says lock your knees, and never be doing any of that. So again, it was just I was really lucky, because I certainly, like everyone when I was younger, thought I would never get injured just because I was fit and healthy, but I was lucky to have people instill good habits in me on all of those things. And I certainly think it's, even if you're a 12-year-old bass player learning for the first time, it's a good idea to really think about it, because if you never get the injury, it's a lot easier than having to manage something down the line. So yeah, that's my lucky
The buggy system is smart. I remember maybe 20 years ago or something, 15 years ago, I bought this SWR Basic Black, this amp, and from one of the theater musicians, and I realized not too long after why he was selling it. It was just a little big, and I don't play much amplified, but I was going to this gig, pulled that thing out of the car, and I just felt my lower back give away. And let me tell you, that was during holiday season. I had many gigs every weekend. I got a whole new respect for backs with that. I haven't had anything bad really happen, but it took me like 20 minutes to get into the car, after that gig, where like it was like a 70-year-old man holding on to everything. And it's important, those lessons, like what Paul was talking about with like even picking up the bass. I even, like, when I'm traveling, I even try to make sure not to put my backpack on one shoulder, which is a tendency of mine, or those little things you do every day, they can add up, and the bass on the shoulder and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, and look, same as you. I made the SWR mistake as a young person, and it's not a mistake. They're brilliant amps. I loved my amp. I had a Working Man, but I remember that, like, when I went into the shop to get it, and I'd saved for a long time, and I sort of saw the Working Man's 12 and the Working Man's 15, and I was like, well, the 15 has to be better, right? It just has to be. It's so big. And then spent the next 3 years lugging that thing to every gig, and I loved it. It sounded great, but the sooner that I made the sort of acoustic image combo amp switch, the better for me, because I can just lift that thing with one hand out of the car, and then it's on the buggy, and
getting the right
SWR,
gear.
Brilliant amps, really heavy.
Well, Ben, I love the new duo. I love what you do, and I can't wait. We got to do a round 3 at some point in the future here. It's hopefully travel will open up again. So the next time if you make it out here to California, or when I'm back in Australia, and I probably will come back with my wife, because I think she'll divorce me if I go back to Australia without her. But we gotta
there's still so much for you to see. Yeah,
I know. Well,
absolutely.
Well, that's what it's going to a country the size of the United States, and I was there for 2 weeks. That's, I saw Melbourne and Sydney, and that just made me realize how much more, even just in those 2 cities, I should see, let alone the rest of the country. It's a cool place you live in.
You too, yeah. Hopefully we get the world open again very soon, and I can come and see you. And thanks so much for chatting with me, and it's so great to catch up. And I'm really glad you liked the album, and I hope anyone listening checks it out. It'll be on Bandcamp probably in August, and and check out anything else that I've been doing if you want to. And it's such a pleasure, Jason. Thanks so much, man.
Ben, you are awesome, sir. I love what you do, and I can't wait to hang out with you in person again. But until that time, I will bide my time by listening to all these great albums and checking out these projects that you're up to. And if I'm ever feeling lazy, looking at Ben and the output, the quality and the quantity of what he does, on top of a full-time orchestra job, might I add, that's a good kick in the pants for me. I am so pumped. This is the 3rd of 4 outros that I record. I do these in batches. If you've listened to the podcast before, that's how that goes. It is June, what is it today? The 30th. So I got back late last night from my trip to Long Beach, California for the Roboth Institute, LA, and then from Indianapolis. I was in Wabash, Indiana, which is kind of between Indianapolis and Chicago, for Wabass. Wow! 14 years of Wabass. I think Salito's Roboth Institute, I believe this is the 4th year she's run it, if I remember right. But my head is spinning. I have so many things to think about. I'm so excited about what I saw, and I'm just kind of I'm just sort of trying to digest. It's crazy. It's like, a year and a half of just sitting at home and slowly losing my mind, trying to occupy myself with different projects. And all of a sudden, out on the town, back with people, back, making music together. Oh my goodness. It has been so much fun. more to come on that soon. But let's close out and thank the team. Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, and Trevor Jones. Mitch makes beautiful basses in Kilgore, Texas, just east of Dallas-Fort Worth. Learn more about what he does at mitchmooring.com. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.